We're not going anywhere. We're still going to continue to make progress across the country. Number two, we wanted to make sure to lift up those organizations that are successful and bring them together so they can learn from each other, figure out what are the best ways to intervene and support and provide a voice to young men in our communities. And number three, and most importantly, give us an opportunity to see outstanding young men all across the country that are not reported on enough, who are doing positive work, who are leaders in their communities, who are succeeding in school, who are supporting their brothers, who are being respectful to their sisters, who are the kinds of young men that are going to be leaders of this country in the future. And that story is not told often enough. And the young men who are sitting on this stage and who are in the audience, they represent that kind of excellence. And for us to be able to bring them together so that they can learn from each other, support each other, and ultimately lead together, that's the thing that's most important to us.
One of the most exciting things I heard since I showed up today was when we did our PSA about 4 years ago, where you taught me how to keep my elbow in.
Exactly. Yeah, he was,
helped me.
He was kind of.
I was kind of chicken winging
a little bit, and it wasn't working. So
you helped me with my resume.
That's exactly right.
All that kind of good stuff. Right. Obviously, I had the best mentor in that regard. But in terms of from that PSA, the action and the following that we've been able to accumulate in a short amount of time, 50,000
new mentors. Yeah,
have signed up since
outstanding
PSA. So talking about the acknowledgement and the understanding of the impact we can all have in terms of what our expertises are, our perspective on the world, and mobilizing in our communities. The action has been followed, and it's all because of the idea that you had at the beginning.
Well, it helped that you were in the PSA. Let's face it, nobody wanted to see my jump shot. But it does raise this question, Steph, and I know there are other folks who were here. Richard Sherman was by, and obviously John is an amazing musician. One of the challenges I think that we all face is how do we support young men who oftentimes don't have fathers now, or don't have a relationship with the fathers. I was one of those young people. I didn't know my father very well. I met him once, and that was it. And I know that you've spoken about how important your father was in your life. I thought it'd be useful for you to reflect on, now that you are a father yourself, but you also have friends who maybe didn't have that presence in their lives the way Del was a presence in your life. How does that make you think about the need to mentor and support young men who maybe don't have that role model right in front of them, and who's providing the support and focus that your father was able to give you?
I was definitely a fortunate upbringing where my dad, he played 16 years in the NBA, and everybody asked me, like, what's the biggest advice that he gave you? What's the thing he said that really shaped your perspective on the world and kind of gave you the confidence to go out and be the person that I am today? There wasn't one thing he specifically said. It was the consistent presence that he had and how he carried himself, and me being able to just witness that on a daily basis that gave me a moral compass, to be honest, about how I should carry myself, no matter what my passion was in life. It obviously ended up being basketball, but how I carried myself in the classroom, how I carried myself at home, how I treated people, whether they could do anything for me or not. The way that he carried himself on the daily, my eyeballs are just locked in. And to your point around some, kids that and young men that don't have that presence, is awakened me to a responsibility that we have with the platforms that we have, and the sense of visibility that I have, that how I carry myself, how I speak, and what I'm educated on, my willingness to try to meet people where they are can make a huge difference, whether it's 5 seconds, 10 minutes, multiple, run-ins. We all have an opportunity to use that platform, that visibility, to shape somebody's perspective. And that one moment can be a difference maker for a lifetime. And so for me, it's and I know I can speak for a lot of my teammates and people in our league as well. The social responsibility we feel to take a stand for things that we believe in, look out for the next generation. I could speak on how all my teammates are using the resource they have, to impact their communities, whether it's here in Oakland, where they're from. There's a movement, and there's a collective awareness and responsibility that I think we're all buying into and tapping into and taking responsibility for. And we understand how impactful it can be. And my dad set that example for me, and I want to be able to give that back.
Outstanding. And, one of the points Steph made is consistency. And look, for all kinds of historical reasons, discrimination, mass incarceration, lack of job opportunities, et cetera, oftentimes fathers, men may not have been able to provide that consistency the way, in retrospect, they might want to. But the one thing we've learned from watching all the amazing programs that are taking place across the country is that we can all be surrogate fathers. We can all be big brothers. It turns out that if you just give somebody some attention and say, you know what, you matter. How are you doing? How are you thinking about your next steps? Do you really think that's the best thing to do? People respond to that. So my father might not have been in my house, but there were a whole bunch of men around who taught me something and guided me. And look, it goes without saying, I want to be really clear about this. The amazing job that single moms are doing raising kids, and the love and support and energy that they're providing is that's the foundation. But what is true is that it's hard for a mom to do it by herself. And you now have small kids, right? Kids will wear you out. And if you're just by yourself and you don't have a support system where you're able to say, man, I'm tired of this knucklehead. Here, you take him for a while. And that can if somebody's working, somebody else might be able to cover for the other parent. It's difficult for somebody by themselves to do all of what's required. And that's why I think the kinds of mentoring programs and initiatives that we've been seeing through My Brother's Keepers end up being so important. And you're right. If we can get 50,000 more mentors, that means we can get 100,000 more mentors, because I guarantee you there's still more young men out there who could use an adult in their lives who are just paying attention and there consistently for them. And it doesn't take a lot of work, but it does require that you actually care.
And a point you just made, these kids up here on the stage, kids in the audience, all around this community and this country and in the world, really, they matter. So we want to turn it over to these kids to hopefully see what kind of questions they have on their minds. And we can hopefully give them a little bit of information. I say myself, you really want to hear what this guy has to say, but I'll chime in every once in a while. But Michael, we got a kind of a list of how we want to go about it.
Yep, Mr. President Steph, we've got a couple dozen young men from all over the country representing My Brother's Keeper programs, working on everything from youth violence prevention to mentoring to changing policy, our future. And so we've got a few questions that we'll get to. Our first question is from Raul, from both of you, for both of you who wants to talk a little bit about growing up.
Hello, my name is Raul Chavira. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I go to school at Native American Community Academy. My question for you is kind of a two-part question. It's like, what were some of the struggles that you went through as a kid, and how did you get through it without the MBK Alliance?
Well, Steph, why don't you talk a little bit about some of your struggles with your ankles, man?
That's a sensitive subject.
I mean,
oh man.
You know, it worked out, so he can talk about it now because he won 2 MVPs after that.
That's pretty good. I got no comeback for that one. Yeah, I just have to wear these big bionic braces now. So I had to overcome my ankles with these braces. No, I think my major struggle was the self-confidence, to be honest with you. You know, growing up with a passion to play basketball and people thinking that my future was kind of destined based on what my dad did. That wasn't the case for me. My journey was entirely different. And just in life in general, self-confidence was something that wasn't always natural for me. It took me a while to get to a place where I was comfortable in a room or comfortable dealing with challenges and understanding that I had it in me. I had the talent, I had to believe, or had the talent and the skill set, but the confidence to kind of get over that hump was a process. And I had to rely on, you know, the community that was around me to get me through that. Now, I always tell people, you know, you have to be your biggest, you know, cheerleader at times, but that's harder to do than you might think. And the village that was around me were my biggest supporters and trying to, you know, allow me to understand what I was capable of, you know, to not back down from any challenge. I understand that I was put on this earth for a reason, and it was and whatever that was going to manifest itself with, you know, my attention to detail, my work ethic, and things like that. But it was a constant struggle. So the swagger and the confidence you see on the court right now, it wasn't always there. It took me a minute to get there, but I had to continue to grind. And so wherever, you know, you are in that process, just keep fighting.
Yeah. You know, for me, and I've written about this, I've talked about this. You know, I was all kinds of screwed up when I was in high school. So many of you are way ahead of where I was at the time in terms of your, you know, accomplishments and your focus and your commitment to something larger than yourself. For me, I was a good kid in the sense that I think I was always kind to people. I didn't have a mean spirit, but I did not have a sense of purpose or a clear sense of direction through a big chunk of my my high school years. And in retrospect, I recognize some of it was I was angry about my father not being there. Some of it was I was growing up in an environment as a African American boy where we didn't have a large African American community. So there were all kinds of reasons for why I was acting out the way I did. And we didn't have My Brother's Keeper. I did have a foundation of love from my mother and my grandparents. And I think that wherever you can find it, having one person who believes in you and you can count on, and it may be your mom, it may be your grandma, it may be an uncle, it may be a coach, whoever that is, you know, I think you have to kind of hang on to that. What Steph just described of people who believe in you, you may not always find it exactly the way you would want it but somebody out there is believing in you, and you got to listen to them and bring them into your life. But the second thing for me, at least, that ended up being the most important thing was when I stopped thinking about myself and I started thinking about how can I be useful to other people. And I think that I did not grow up and become the person I am until I was less focused on me and I was more focused on how could I be useful? Who could I help? Because the amazing thing is when you help somebody, when you're a positive influence on somebody, when you're working hard on behalf of somebody, and you see that impact, that gives you confidence. You say, oh, I actually was useful to that person. They actually feel better because of what I did. Or over time, as I developed my career, that person's got health care that didn't have it. That makes me feel good. That child is able to go to college and they couldn't afford it before. And I think we live in a culture where a lot of times our worth is measured by how much money we have and how famous we are. And I will tell you that at the end of the day, the thing that will give you confidence is not that, because I know a lot of rich people who are all messed up. And I know a lot of famous people who are all messed up. We both do. And the thing that actually you will find as you get older that you come to respect the most are people whose confidence is grounded in the fact that they do the work, they do their jobs well, they look after people who are counting on them, they are providing a positive impact in their communities. And you get that, and that will carry you a very long way.
Our next question is from Keyshawn, who wanted to talk about policing in prisons.
My name is Keyshawn White. Excuse me. My name is Keyshawn White. I'm from Fresno, California. I came here with Fresno Boys and Men of Color, and I feel as if it's too much money has been spent on policing and not enough money has been provided to people who are closer to the problem. How can we create a system that empowers the community members who are on the ground doing great work every day to reduce crime and actually have solutions and relationships needed to make long-term change and transformation?
Well, this is an issue that I worked on as president, and I continue to work on through the foundation. We incarcerate more people by far than just about every other country on earth. It is disproportionately people of color who are incarcerated. And there's a long history as to why that happened. And the question now is, how do we begin to reverse it? And part of the answer is to create economic opportunities in communities so that if you are willing to work hard, you can make a living and support a family. And in too many of our communities, those opportunities are restricted and too far and few between. Part of the answer is our education system and how we're investing in making sure that young people, regardless of where they start, get a good start in life. Because for a lot of our young people, they fall behind early. And it's hard when you're behind early. If you can't read at your grade level when you're young, you start feeling like, well, maybe I'm stupid, when in fact, no, it's just that somebody didn't give you the time that you needed in order to succeed, and the kids who are doing better had advantages you didn't have. So we've got to make those investments. But the third part of this, and what you're touching on, is we have to build a pipeline of success for young people, not failure. And that means that the criminal justice system itself has to make some changes. If you want to know where most of that work needs to be done, though, that most of that work needs to be done at the local level and not at the federal level. Because one thing that I think people don't realize is that most of our criminal laws are state laws. They're not federal laws. Most of the prison population are state prison populations, not federal prison populations. And so one of the things that communities have to do in terms of mobilizing is getting educated on who's making decisions about the drug laws, the parole system, the bail system, the district attorneys at the local levels, and making sure that the people who are in those positions of power are knowledgeable about the communities they're serving, care about the communities they're serving, are committed to justice in how they apply the laws. And too often, folks don't know who those folks are. They're just somebody. And you know, the police, in fact, some communities need more police, not fewer police. But the way that police operate in those communities, building trust, knowing who's so that if somebody, just because they're wearing a hoodie doesn't mean they're a criminal. That kid, he's doing great in school. That's just the style. He's been watching what Steph's wearing. Right? You need to make sure that police are trained and accountable in serving those communities. All those decisions are typically made at the local levels, and one of the things that we've encouraged people to do, both in MBK, but also during some of the other incidents that occurred during the course of my presidency, was let's put together toolkits so people understand who makes the decision. You know, do you have a state's attorney who is committed to applying the criminal justice system in a fair, equitable way? And if not, vote that person out and find somebody who will.
Mr. President, I think that one of the guides that people can find is the Task Force on 21st Century Policing that you started, and that guide and that toolkit is still out and available, and communities are continuing to make progress if people want to look that up. So one of the things that we did, Mr. President and staff, is we opened up for online questions, and we got hundreds and hundreds of questions, as you could imagine. And so we selected a couple of those. And I think this one, both of you as fathers of daughters, is a really great question. It's from Portia Brownridge from the great city of Oakland, California. Oaktown. I got to give San Francisco some love too. Our partners, Mayor Breed. Portia's question is, I understand that young boys and men need a space of their own to discuss and support each other. So I ask, how can us Black women be of support and influence without taking over for these organizations and efforts?
If you want, you good?
I know, we're gonna get in trouble now. They said no. I think acknowledging the fact that it historically has been a situation where a group of men have had a hard time being open about their feelings and things that they're, may have anxiety over, or issues that they don't want to be completely transparent about, and that the acknowledgement of that kind of situation and finding different outlets and resources that young men, older men can. Why
are you pointing at me?
Can tap.
Why did you point at me?
General direction. Can tap into in terms of investing in themselves and their mindset and their perspective. It's important. So, I would say from my experience being an athlete and being in a locker room of 15 men. There are conversations that we may have about real things that we're going through that may be tough to articulate outside of that, but just the respect level of or the understanding that, those conversations we're bouncing ideas off of each other. We're trying to figure out how we can better ourselves, individually and as a group. And that is a very powerful setting to be in. That's been my experience in the last 10 years. And I've learned so much from my fellow teammates from different backgrounds, from, different walks of life who've had, different experiences. And we've really, committed to opening up, that space. And that's something that I've tapped into. So in terms of just respecting that environment, I may not be able to come home and say exactly what was all said, but that is something that is bettering me as a husband, as a father. And that will have ripple effects throughout the community as well, that anybody that kind of comes in contact with me. Obviously, that's one part of my life, and my family life and my relationship with my wife is another huge piece of it. But acknowledging the fact that hasn't always been, we haven't been able to find those type of connections and resources and those safe spaces for guys to be fully transparent about the things that they're going through. That's my best answer to it, for sure.
That was an excellent answer. Yeah. Look, a couple of things that are worth pointing out. Number one is young women of color and young women generally need enormous amount of support too. They carry a double burden. Because oftentimes they're dealing with sexism along with racism. And as a consequence, for example, through the foundation, we've got sets of programs, for example, something that Michelle and I started called Let Girls Learn, that is now carrying over, not just here in the United States, but internationally, to make sure that young women are provided the educational opportunities that too often they've been denied in areas like science, technology, and math, where oftentimes they're steered away from those opportunities, despite the fact that those are excellent careers and they're entirely capable. So part of the reason that we set up My Brother's Keeper was not because girls have it easier, but frankly, it's what Steph said, which is a lot of young men in this society, particularly young men of color, have difficulty finding the space and the resources and support to deal with their issues. And they've got issues. We've got issues. A good example, just in my own household. When me and my boys get together, we'll watch a game or we'll play a game. And sometimes we'll sit there for an hour and we won't say nothing, but we're watching the game. And then we'll go play a game. And afterwards, Michelle will ask, well, like, how's Steph doing? I heard, he had this issue. And I was like, oh, really? I didn't know, because we're watching the game, Well, you were with him all day. What? No, I didn't know. We didn't talk about that, right? Michelle, she will get with her girlfriends, and they'll show up at noon, and they'll be sitting there and they're talking. I'll leave, come back 3 hours later. They are still talking. All they've been doing is talking the entire time about every piece of business they got, right? And, they've cried, they've oh, child, you should have seen, they've broken down every terrible thing that I did, and, but he's worth keeping anyway, even though he's not. So they've broken it all down. That's the difference. And it has to do with socialization, but what that does mean is, I think, that there is the ability to talk about vulnerabilities, challenges, doubts, lack of confidence, etc., in settings for women and girls that sometimes aren't available for men. Now, in terms of how I think young women and women generally can support young men, I think saying you matter. We respect you. We recognize the challenges you are under. That is always important, hearing that. But I also think there's nothing wrong with also having high expectations and demanding accountability from young men. Because I think that sometimes, and I'm going to quote Michelle here because, she has articulated this sometimes when we've had dinner together and we're talking about just raising children. That saying about how moms sometimes they'll raise their girls, but they'll mother their boys. They will overcompensate for the challenges that are out there by saying, "Oh, honey, that's okay," even though sometimes it's not. And I think sometimes our young women allow young men to get away with stuff that they probably should not. So, I actually would, on the one hand, support, understanding, listening. That's true of any human relationship, but also expectations about as a young woman, how should you be treated by a guy you're going out with, and making sure that guys understand, no, that's not how I expect to be treated. I think that is also important because we tend to rise to the expectations that are set for us. If a young boy is taught early on, you know what, you are going to be kind to people, not bully people, that will have an impact. If you say you treat young women with respect, they are not objects. They are human with the same, aspirations and desires, and are just as worthy of respect as you are. That has an impact. So you got to set that tone early in life.
So, Sister Portia, I hope you're watching. Thanks for allowing some real truth-telling to be told on this stage. That was incredible. And check out Mrs. Obama's Global Girls Alliance. I actually share an office with the young woman who leads that program. So we're thinking about these at the Obama Foundation on both sides. So, Mr. President, you said you wanted to talk about hopes, dreams, and anything that was on the mind of our young men of color. So our next question is from Leo, and he wants to talk about music.
Okay, Leo.
Mr. President.
How are you, Leo?
I'm well.
Good. You look good.
Welcome to the city. You know what I mean?
Sir.
So one thing that connected us is that I know that you love music.
Love music.
I watched an interview where you said that Kendrick's album was better than Drake's.
Well, why are you stirring stuff up now?
I'm curious. I'm curious to know why. But more importantly, what role does music have? What role does music have on your life, and what role can music have when it comes to liberation, policy change, social change, and all those other items?
Okay.
What can music play when it comes to that?
Are you a musician?
I am a musician.
I figure you are. Well, I'm gonna have to listen to some of your tracks now. Leo. I'm sure will have. He can give me a little taste. It's interesting when Raul, was it when we were talking earlier, and you were asking about what challenges I went through. I do think that, especially when I was young, music was a empowering factor in my life.